Hello everyone, I'm Alan Joachim with the Sons of History. Today is December 7th, 2021, which is the 80th anniversary of the Pearl Harbor attack. Now, we felt that, this is an important day to remember. A lot of people are forgetting, they're thinking it's ancient history, but, it was a pretty exciting day. It was a pretty sad day, a tragic day. A lot of people were killed, not just Americans. The United States was not the only country that was attacked that day. There were a lot of events that took place, and we wanted to talk about it. But not just what happened that day, but also what happened afterwards and some of the events that led up to the attack. So now this is going to be a two-part series. The first part is going to be about the attack itself and what happened immediately afterwards. Part two is going to go back a ways and talk about, how did Pearl Harbor happen? Was it preventable? A lot of things to consider, which could be thought of even in today's foreign policy events. So let's talk about what happened at Pearl Harbor. Now, a lot of people think, what's the big deal? Okay, so we were attacked. It's World War II. Everybody got attacked. Well, the United States was not in the war at that time. It was a sneak attack. There were a lot of, peace negotiations that were going on. There was no formal warning, no declaration of war. Most of the fighting had been going on in Europe. Now, you had Adolf Hitler of Germany, Joseph Stalin. Now, those two guys pretty much started the war in Europe when they invaded Poland. Now, these two guys, Winston Churchill and Charles de Gaulle, they led the free world, Great Britain and France. Now, I wanted to, one of the things that we mentioned is that, remember December the 7th, remember Pearl Harbor. Those nations were fighting. And Japan and China were also fighting. They've been fighting since July of 1937. The United States the only involvement the United States was in was that they were supplying weaponry to China, and they were also trying to help out the British. Because, Nazi Germany and Japan and Fascist Italy signed what was known as the Tripartite Pact. Now, that's important to know, and that'll be more on the part two series. But, Not a good day. So these European countries, Japanese, Chinese, they're all fighting. Well, let's go into Pearl Harbor. Okay, so what happened was that on November the 26th, you had six aircraft carriers, Japanese aircraft carriers. They left the Japanese home waters, and what they did was, now this guy right here, this is Admiral, I want to say Chuchi Nagumo. Now, he was the commander of the carrier strike force that left Japan, and they were heading east across the Pacific, and their destination was Pearl Harbor. Now, those six aircraft carriers, let's see if I can remember their names. Kaga, Akagi, Soryo, Hiryu, Zuikaku, and Shokaku. We'll tell you about their fates later on. Okay, they were carrying these three types of planes. Now, that is a fighter plane, that's the Zero. That is the dive bomber, which is called the Val. Now, at the Pearl Harbor attack, these bombers were used as dive bombers and as high-level bombers. Now, that is the Kate, that is the torpedo plane. So, now, 353 planes participated in the Pearl Harbor attack. So, I'm sure the six carriers were carrying a lot more than 353 planes, but these were the three important planes to know. They were sailing across. Now they were undetected, except there was a Soviet ship a Soviet ship did run into them, and Japan and Soviet Union were not at war. They let the ship go. They speculate that maybe Joseph Stalin knew what was going on, but he was. Soviets were fighting for their lives against the Nazis. So, speculation that, okay, Stalin knew, so you bomb United States and the United States gets into the war. Good, we need them in the war. So, again, that's just speculation. Anyway, so the Japanese sailed across the seas. These are some pictures of the actual carriers. These are the Hawaiian Islands. So you'll see Honolulu way over here, and over here is Midway. Now, Midway is important later on in the story. Major battle that took place there. So, okay, so now this was the primary target. Now, this is Pearl Harbor. That's Ford Island. That's going into the... this is looking southward, so the Pacific Ocean is over here. So you had... most of the battleships were laid out over here, and you have Hickam Field... Well, okay, this is a picture. This will actually kind of give you an explanation of what everything is. So Hickam Field would be right here. Oil storage, very important in the story. East Lock sounds Scottish. So Navy Yard right here. Now this is where they repair ships, also important. So there's Ford Island, and the Sea Channel, which is right there. Okay, so this was their primary target. So the Japanese Carrier Task Force went east and then went south, and from there they launched their planes at 6 a.m. on December the 7th. And this is them taking off. That's an actual footage of one of the Japanese planes taking off from one of the aircraft carriers. Now, while that was going on, right outside Pearl Harbor, there were 5... They call them Japanese midget subs. So if I offend anybody, hey, get mad at the Japanese. But yeah, they were called the midget subs. It was a 2-man crew. One of them got too close to that American destroyer called the USS Ward. The Ward saw that Japanese mini sub. I'm going to say mini sub because I don't want to use the short version of Japanese. When you talk about all this stuff and you read it, you know, they don't use the word Japanese. So I pissed off some people in the past. But okay, so the mini sub, we'll call it a mini sub. Mini sub got too close. The Ward saw, and the Ward sank the ship through a couple of depth charges, and I believe they rammed into it. But yeah, they killed the 2-man crew. The commander of the USS Ward radioed in Pearl and reported the incident, but it didn't seem to, you know, people thought maybe, okay, you might be making a mistake. Now, had they taken it seriously, it maybe could have prevented the slaughter that took place at Pearl Harbor. So now that is Admiral Husband Kimmel. He was the commander-in-chief of the Navy in the Pacific. Now that guy here, he was General Walter Short. Now he was the commander of the army forces in the Hawaiian Islands. This guy obviously had more power because he was the commander-in-chief of the whole Pacific. He was just commander of the Hawaiian Islands. So those two were the guys that were in charge. They would become scapegoats later on after the attack took place. So now, okay, on the northern part of the island, around 7:02, there was a 2-man crew. This was known as the Opana radar. Around 7:02 in the morning, they detected the incoming Japanese planes. The 2 radio operators, they saw it. They called it in, and they called it in at Fort Shafter. Yeah, the information center at Fort Shafter. They reported the planes. The lieutenant who answered the phone, he told them that it was most likely a dozen B-17s flying in from San Francisco, and was like, don't worry about it. So the 2 guys, they saw the planes coming. They reported it. No one took it seriously. Nobody thought it was the Japanese. They thought it was just some of our guys flying in. Had someone taken it seriously? Could the slaughter been prevented? Possibly. I mean, there was enough time to get a lot of our planes up in the ground, and it probably could have prevented, much of the attack. But again, nothing happened. That's the Opana radar station on the north part of the island. So dozen B-17s, flying fortresses, they came in, and they landed right around the attack. Okay, so now there were 2 waves that flew in. The first wave flew in, and then they attacked for about 1 hour, and then when they left, the second wave showed up around 15 minutes later, and they also attacked for about an hour. So the attack started, I've seen different sources, but 7:55 a.m. local Hawaiian time seems to be the one that I've seen that the most. So the targets, now remember, you had high-level bombers, dive bombers, fighters, and torpedo bombers. The torpedo bombers obviously all concentrated at Pearl Harbor, but they also wanted to make sure that the fighter planes were bombed so that they won't intercept their planes, the Japanese planes, and shoot them down and interfere with the attack. So now there were several airfields in Hawaii. The two big ones were Wheeler Field and Hickam Field. There was also, a runway over on Ford Island, which was right in the middle of Pearl Harbor. There was this one, I guess it's called Iwa. There's Bellows Field, and I can't even pronounce it. Kaneohe, I don't know. Now, here's the big deal, is that this one right here, Halewa, they didn't attack it. Now that's going to make a big deal later on in the story, and we will talk about that. So this was the routes that the Japanese planes took, and now this guy right here, his name was Mitsu Fuchida. Interesting story about Mitsu Fuchida. Actually, we'll talk about that part later, and I know because I have it in my notes. But this guy, Mitsu Fuchida, when he saw that there were no American planes jumping up to intercept them, he sent a radio signal, and that radio signal was sent at 7:49 a.m. It was a coded message, and he said, Tora, Tora. Actually, it was Tora, 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 but I believe what he really said was Tora, 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 which meant tiger, 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 which meant we surprised them. So the attack commenced, and the torpedo planes came in. Now, this was Battleship Row right here. I know that Pennsylvania, that was one of the battleships was sitting out over here. So it got spared a lot of most of the damage. But the California, Oklahoma, Maryland, West Virginia, Tennessee, Arizona, and Nevada. Now, this ship over here, the Utah, the Japanese thought that was an aircraft carrier, which, by the way, that was their primary targets. The three aircraft carriers, which were the Enterprise, Saratoga, and Lexington. Fortunately, they were not there that day. But the battleships were there, and so they became the primary targets. And now during the attack, Oklahoma and Arizona got it the worst. Utah got it bad also. But those three ships were the only ships that never, they were so badly damaged that they did not participate in the war after that. Those were the only three. All the other ships that were damaged, they all participated in the war. They may have been sunk, but they were brought back, and they were taken care of. So they came in, and it was carnage. It was really bad. So now this is a picture of Ford Island. Now here's the interesting thing, is that guy right there, or that guy right there, I met a guy that was on Ford Island, and he claimed that he was one of those two guys. Well, I'm not going to call him a liar, but pretty interesting. But he said he witnessed the whole thing. He was right in the middle of everything. You can see one of the battleships right there. But yeah, Ford Island, they were right in the middle of the whole thing. Remember, Ford Island was right in the middle of Pearl Harbor. That's how you got out. So interesting pictures here. It was just not a good day to be on one of the battleships. So thought we'd just show you some of these. Here's a Japanese plane. Looks like a torpedo bomber heading in. One of the Kates. So now that was the USS Shaw. It was a destroyer. Blew up, but they did manage to get it. It did fight later on in the war. So you can imagine what those guys went through. Okay, now this is the Maryland. That is the Oklahoma. Now the Oklahoma was the one that capsized. If you watched the movie Pearl Harbor, the one with Ben Affleck and Alec Baldwin. Yeah, spilt my drink. I hate it when that happens. Yeah, Alec Baldwin. That's another story. But so the Oklahoma did not participate in the war. It was towed back to the States, and it ended up getting sunk. So more pictures. I don't know if that was an original and it just got messed up. Okay, now we're going to talk about the Arizona. Now this is a Val dive bomber, but this one I'm presenting it because it was a high-level bomber in this case. The plane, the Val that bombed the Arizona was a Val and was using as a high-level plane. It dropped a bomb, a 500-pound bomb. That bomb landed in the front magazine. Now, the magazine was where a lot of the artillery shells were stored. And it exploded. The ship just exploded. So much of it blew up that the front of the ship just kind of leaned forward. Killed 1,100 guys. 1,177, I believe, was the number, which was about half of all those that were killed at Pearl Harbor. Now, you remember how I was saying that it was a surprise attack? People just didn't know that there was an attack. There were, warnings being sent out, air raid Pearl Harbor. There was one guy on the radio saying, trying to convince people, hey guys, this is the real McCoy. This is not a joke. The attack took place on a Sunday. I mean, back then, everybody was either sleeping in or going to church or something. So a lot of the men were sleeping in the ship. So, okay. Now, the reason I want to concentrate on this picture here is this is a Val dive bomber. Now, the Vals, like I said, were also used as high-level bombers. One of these flew over the USS Arizona, dropped a 500-pound bomb, and it landed in the forward magazine. Now, the forward magazine was where a lot of the artillery shells were stored. So when it exploded in that magazine, I mean, it blew up the ship, tore a huge hole, and, not a good scene. There were over 1,000 guys that were killed. They're still entombed in the Arizona. If you ever go to Pearl Harbor, the men are still entombed in that ship. One lucky shot. Now, we are going to, I want to show you a video from Tora Tora Tora. I like that movie. It's a very accurate movie. It kind of shows that's a picture of the Arizona blowing up. Yeah, this is what the Arizona looked like after it blew up. So what we're going to do is we're going to show you a video of Tora Tora Tora, just the part that has to do with the USS Arizona. Now, the video quality is not the best. Look, you get what you pay for, okay? I mean, I'm doing this. I'm doing this out of because I love history. I'm not. Yeah, you want the good quality stuff? Go talk to Dustin. He's my Sons of History partner. He's better with the graphics. I like the history portion of it more than the graphics. But we want to show you, because I like it. It's a good part from Tora Tora Tora, and this is the scene of the Japanese bombing the USS Arizona. Okay, pretty intense, but it's a good scene from that movie. I highly recommend Tora Tora Tora. It's pretty accurate. Okay, so now here's a pretty cool picture of Pearl Harbor, and you can see the flak. Remember those B-17s I told you about? Yeah, they flew in right when the air bases were being attacked. So yeah, it wasn't a good scene for them either. All right, so now a couple of quick things real quick. So the second wave arrived 15 minutes after the first one left. Now there were no torpedo planes in the second wave. There were about 171 planes that took place in that one, and the attack lasted for about an hour. Now remember, there were about 353 planes altogether. So what happened was that because the 3 U.S. aircraft carriers were not there, Nagumo, the commander of the Japanese force, he was a little apprehensive about launching a third wave because he didn't know where the carriers were, and he's afraid that if all my planes are bombing Pearl Harbor, we'll be attacked. Our 6 carriers will be attacked. So what he did was he said, "No third wave. We've done enough damage. We're going to get out of here." So they went back north, and then they hightailed it out of there. Now they did attack Wake Island on their way home. Wake Island is an important island, by the way. That was one of the Americans. You can see here Midway Island, and you can see Wake Island. Those were American possessions. The old Pan Am Clipper used to fly from Honolulu to Midway, Wake Island. Guam is around here somewhere, and then to the Philippines, because Philippines was also an American possession. So, all right, now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the heroic events that took place during the attack. Now, this is a picture of the USS Nevada. Now, the USS Nevada was able to get enough steam, and during the attack, they took off. And, it brought a lot of morale, but it also brought a lot of attention from the Japanese. And they bombed the hell out of it. Almost said that word. They bombed the hell out of it. And the unfortunate thing is that the guys on the Nevada knew that if they were sunk in the channel, they would bottle up the whole harbor and nobody would be able to get in and out. So what they did was, because they were just getting bombed to hell, they beached themselves on one of the beaches before they could get to the channel. So, but it was a valiant effort and it thrilled a lot of people. Okay, now this guy right here, very interesting story. Now his name was Doris Miller, but people called him Dory Miller. Now Dory Miller was a cook. He was also the heavyweight champion for the USS West Virginia. Couple of little interesting tidbits about him. And I want to make sure I get it right. Now, the captain, his name was Mervyn Benyon. Now Mervyn Benyon, he showed some bravery himself. During the attack, he was mortally wounded, and what he did was instead of trying to get evacuated, he was giving orders to help save as many people as possible. Now, one of the guys that carried him away to safety was Dory Miller. The other guy was a Lieutenant Commander Dwar Johnson. They carried the captain to safety, but he ended up dying anyway from his wounds. If you see the movie Pearl Harbor, Cuba Gooding Jr. plays Dory Miller, and you'll see the scene where he's talking to his captain. So that that kind of did really happen the way they showed it. Benyon was awarded the Medal of Honor and the Purple Heart. Now that was the captain of the West Virginia. Now Dory Miller, after he carried the captain away, he was instructed to help get a 50 caliber machine gun together. Now he was not trained with 50 caliber machine guns, but this guy here just took the initiative, got behind that gun, and just started shooting at the Japanese planes. He became a national hero. Here he is being awarded the Navy Cross by Chester Nimitz. Now, Chester Nimitz took the place of Husband Kimmel. Husband Kimmel was relieved of command after the Pearl Harbor attack. He was the scapegoat. Chester Nimitz took over his command. And this picture over here, you can see Dory Miller being awarded the Navy Cross. The unfortunate thing about Dory Miller was that he was killed a couple of years later in battle, and but they just named a ship after him. So, national hero right there. Okay, Welch and Taylor. I don't know which one is Welch and which is Taylor. I can't tell. But now these two guys, Remember when I mentioned a while back that there was, I bet you I have a photo of it earlier. Okay, the Halewa. The Japanese did not bother to attack Halewa. So those two guys, Welch and Taylor, and let me see if I can get their full names. I know one of them is named Kenneth. But what happened was that they drove, oh, you know what? Yep, I knew it. They drove to Halewa, and they got in their, let's see, George Welch, they're both second lieutenants. We had Second Lieutenant George Welch and Second Lieutenant Kenneth Taylor. Now, so what happened was that these two guys drove to Halewa. It was not attacked, and they got in their P-40. You can call it a Warhawk, you can call it a Tomahawk. I've heard it being called both. But they got in their P-40s, and together those two shot down about 7 Japanese planes. Now, there were 29 Japanese planes altogether that were shot down, but yeah, they were credited with 7. Now, there were about 5 Americans that were able to take off and attack the Japanese planes. Every attempt made usually meant death because the Japanese would swarm on the guy trying to take off and kill him. But 5 did manage to get out, and those two managed to shoot down 7 Japanese planes. So, okay, there were a couple more I want to mention real quick. I'm just going to mention in passing here who some of the other heroes were. There was a James Ward, first-class seaman, sacrificed his life. He was on the USS Oklahoma. He was doing everything he could to save as many men as possible. That was the ship that capsized, but in the process of rescuing some men, he himself was killed in the process. Okay, so Donald Ross is on the USS Nevada, and he ended up getting blinded and choking on smoke, wouldn't abandon his station. He wanted to make sure that, the Nevada stayed in the fight and that men were rescued. So, those are some of the people, their names need to be mentioned so that, people won't forget who they are. So, all right, now, if you go to Pearl Harbor today, that is the memorial for the USS Arizona. I'm going to mention a couple of stats real quick. Okay, so overall, you had 2,403 servicemen who were killed. 1,100 were killed on the USS Arizona. 1,178 were wounded in Oahu itself. You had about different sources, depending on who you read, 169 to 188 U.S. planes destroyed, 19 ships damaged or destroyed. Of the 8 Navy battleships, all were damaged or sunk. And again, the Arizona and the Oklahoma were the 2 battleships that they were done. And then also the Utah. It wasn't a battleship, but the Japanese thought that it was an aircraft carrier. So now 68 civilians did get killed. Yes, 68 civilians did get killed. A lot of it was because artillery, the flak, the artillery shells that were fired against the Japanese planes, they landed on, what goes up must come down. They landed and killed many of the civilians. Now, if you go to, that's Ford Island. If you go to Pearl Harbor, you can see the Arizona. It's still, the men are still entombed in there, and it's leaking oil. It's been leaking oil since day one. I've been there once. I was there about 40-some years ago. It's very solemn. That's the names of the Navy and Marines who were killed on the Arizona. Okay, now the Japanese. They lost 29 planes. They lost all 5 of their mini subs. Now one Japanese commander was captured. So he was like POW number 1. The number of people killed I've seen between 64 to 129. I can't get an accurate number. But Katsuo Sakamaki, who was one of the commanding officers of one of the mini subs, was captured. And I believe it was in this one here. Okay, now, want to talk about one of the pilots. This is very, very, very important. One of the pilots who participated, he was a Zero fighter. He participated in the Pearl Harbor attack, got shot up, couldn't make it. His commander said, land on this little island of Niihau. It was supposedly abandoned. So it's just to the west of Kauai. So he lands in Niihau, crash lands in Niihau, and well, I'll get to that part. Well, okay, this is the interesting part. He had a huge impact on the Japanese Americans. What had happened was this. The guy's name, the pilot's name, and I'm going to have to read it off here. His name was Shigenori Nishikachi. When he crash landed, an American spotted him, and he didn't know, the American didn't know that Pearl Harbor had been attacked. That island didn't have electricity. They had a shortwave radio, and that's how they found out who this guy was. They didn't know America had been attacked. But guy spoke Japanese. The American didn't, so they went and grabbed a guy by the name of Ishimatsu Shintani. He was a 60-year-old beekeeper. He kind of freaked out when he talked to the Japanese pilot, but no one knew what was discussed. So there was another guy by the name of Yoshio Harada and his wife Irene Harada. Okay, now what had happened was that the Japanese pilot told those two what happened, and when the Hawaiians found out, these are native Hawaiians, when they found out about the attack, they made sure that the Japanese pilot was under lock and key. Well, Yoshio Harada helped him escape, grabbed some guns, and attacked the Hawaiians who were there and held them hostage. One of the guys, a big Hawaiian, 6-foot Hawaiian, by the name of Ben Kanahili. Now, his wife was a hostage by those 3 Japanese. Now, the 60-year-old guy, beekeeper, he didn't participate. He knew kind of what was going to happen, but he didn't participate in the kidnapping of the Hawaiians that were there. Now, Ben Kanahili, big guy, 6 foot, told the Japanese guy, the Yoshio Harada, the American Japanese, take the gun away from the pilot. So he was like, okay, I guess they were just freaking out because Yoshio was still an American. He didn't want anyone killed, but his motivation was to help the Japanese guy get off the island. So a struggle ensues. The Japanese pilot shoots Ben 3 times. Ben survives, and he was so pissed off, he threw the Japanese pilot up against the wall. His wife grabs a stone and starts bashing the pilot in the head. And while the pilot's getting his ass kicked by, Ben's wife, Ben grabs a knife and just slits the Japanese pilot in the throat. Now, Yoshio Harada was watching all this, and he's like, oh crap. Now I'm going to die a traitor's death. So he pulled a shotgun on himself and just blew his guts away. So now, why is this story important? Why am I getting into this? This story was told to Franklin Roosevelt, the President of the United States. Word has it that was one of the big reasons that 100,000 Japanese were interned in the United States. So why did I tell this story? Okay, this story got back to Franklin Roosevelt. Speculation has it that this was the reason why Franklin Roosevelt ordered the Japanese interned, about 100,000 of them, and they were put in internment camps, many of them for the duration of the war. Not all of them. Many of them went and fought for the United States and Europe. But this had a lot to do, speculation as to why FDR decided to intern the Japanese Americans. Many of them were American citizens. So, all right. So, as we said, Walter Short, general, scapegoat. Husband Kimmel, scapegoat, replaced by Nimitz. Now, was it a victory? Yes and no. The no part, obviously, yes, they severely damaged the U.S. Navy. But the no part was because the Enterprise, the Lexington, and the Saratoga they made it out. They were not attacked. That was bad news for this guy. Now, who is this guy? That's Isoroku Yamamoto. He was like the Nimitz in The Husband Kimmel. He was the commander-in-chief of the Imperial Japanese Navy. Very brilliant guy, served in the United States. He didn't want to go to war with the United States because he knew bad idea. He knew the industrial mind of the United States, and he said, if we're going to do it, We're going to have to beat the crap out of the U.S. Maybe we have 6 months, but we have to capture so much territory that the Americans won't have the will to fight and they will sue for peace. So that was his plan. Didn't quite work out that way for him. So now, Japanese goes back, the carrier strike force goes back to Japan. Now, this is the part that's important. There was so much that took place right after the attack. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor was just the first phase. They bombed Midway, Wake Island. Now, the Japanese invaded Wake Island. It wasn't captured until weeks later. They captured Guam. Oh man, they just went everywhere. They kept throughout this whole period. Now, this is going to be like several months, and it's going to go up to about maybe June. And we'll get to what happened in June. But they captured the Philippines. That's where the Bataan Death March and the island of Corregidor. That's where Douglas MacArthur was stationed. He said, "I shall return." They attacked. Now, the Netherlands East Indies was the big deal. French Indochina was already captured. But they captured Thailand, went into Burma. They went into China. It was a huge, huge operation. Pearl Harbor was just one of and I mean, look at all that they did, okay? They just went out and took as much territory as they could, and they did. Franklin Roosevelt, the next day, spoke to a joint session of Congress. This was this famous day of infamy speech, and asked for a declaration of war. Senate, unanimous. House of Representatives, there was only one vote that was a no, but everybody else voted for a declaration of war. It's pretty much unanimous except for one House vote. So here he was speaking, very important. You can go online and you can hear the speech. Okay, so this kind of shows you just how much the Japanese captured. And their thought was, we've captured so much land, there's no way that the Americans will have the stomach to fight us. That wasn't the case. We fought back. We had the Doodle raids where we attacked Tokyo itself. Battle of Coral Sea, where it was the first time we were able to stop them. But the Battle of Midway was the big one. That's where we annihilated the Japanese Navy. They lost 4 aircraft carriers. Those 4 aircraft carriers had participated in the attack on Pearl Harbor. Now, the other 2, Shikaku and Zuikaku, one was sunk at the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October of 44, and one was sunk at the Battle of Philippine Sea, which was in June or July of 44. So all 6 aircraft carriers did end up on the bottom of the sea. So after the Battle of Midway, Guadalcanal was the first offensive operation, and from there we took the offensive. They were on the defensive. Couple things that happened. Isoroku Yamamoto was killed. He was killed on April 18, 1943. 4 of our guys in P-38 Lightnings, long-range ambush on this guy. So he was killed. Nagumo, who headed the Japanese fleet to attack Pearl Harbor, he committed suicide on the island of Saipan, 1944. And now, Mitsu Fuchida, that was the guy who led the attack on Pearl Harbor. That man ended up becoming a missionary. He toured the United States, toured Europe. He had a change of heart about how you treat your enemies. He was very impressed with the way Americans treated Japanese POWs. Wanted to know a little bit more about the religion. Became a Christian, and he became a very beloved man. So, very interesting story. Anyway, okay, so a lot of events, like I said, took place after the Pearl Harbor attack. Britain got involved. Britain now was at war with Japan, Australia, New Zealand. This right here was the main target, the Netherlands East Indies, and we'll talk about that on part 2. We're going to end this episode now. And we'll talk a little bit more about why Pearl Harbor happened. But yes, it was not just the United States. The Netherlands, the Netherlands got involved. They're at war with Japan now. British. Thailand got involved. They were a neutral country. They actually sided with the Japanese. China was even, they got hit pretty badly. The Philippines. Yeah, the war now spread to Ceylon, India, down to Australia, New Zealand, all the way up to Alaska in the Hawaiian Islands. So World War II was truly a global war. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this presentation. We will be back to talk about, we'll be back to do part 2 to talk about why Pearl Harbor happened. Anyway, my name is Alan Joachim. I'm with the Sons of History, and I hope you enjoyed this broadcast on the anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. Thank you and have a good day.